You probably saw the headline on this video. The name of this video is 5 players we haven't talked about enough, for whatever we're going to call it, 5 under the radar players or something like that. And it's always funny when we sit down to do this kind of thing. And sometimes we'll get a question like this in the mailbag, like, who are 5 guys you think are under the radar, that are going to have breakout years, or guys that we're not talking about enough and stuff. And I always laugh because, like, dude, this is all we do is talk about Pitt stuff, right? I like every day of the week I have these Morning Pitt videos where I talk about Pitt stuff, and most of the time I'm talking about Pitt football. I mean, if you go back to the end of the season, I don't know how many have we done these. How many of these have we probably done per month? Probably like 20 or so per month, maybe more. 4 weeks, 5 days a week. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. 7 months, 20. Conservatively, at least 125 of these episodes, and probably at least 110 of them have been about Pitt football. So there aren't many guys we haven't talked about. I'm sure there's a walk-on out there or something like that we're not getting, not giving a lot of coverage to, and I apologize, and we'll try and mention as many guys as possible. But there aren't many guys we haven't talked about. So on this episode today, when it's like guys we're not talking about enough or under the radar players to keep an eye on, they're not necessarily players we haven't mentioned, but they're probably guys we haven't discussed enough in terms of their roles, the role they're going to play on this team, the impact they're going to have on this team, the contributions they're going to have to this team, and the, what element they're going to bring that's going to affect the team's success or lack thereof. And so it's 5 guys that we've talked about, we've mentioned and talked about over the course of training camp and the summer and spring camp and all off season, but maybe we haven't talked about them enough, or maybe we're not fully considering the impact they're going to have. And really, it's just because there's like 1 or 2 guys I really want to talk about. And so this is the way I'm going to do it, is I'm going to put it under the umbrella of guys we're not talking about enough. So here it is on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt. Thursday, right? Today's Thursday? I think it is. By golly, today's Thursday. That's awesome. Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt. 5 guys we're not talking about enough that we need to talk about more. Let's get it started right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it is Thursday. I double checked. Just to reconfirm that this is Thursday, August 22nd, 2024. This is the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You know that already. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the place to get all of your Pitt sports coverage. Everything you could possibly need, football, basketball, recruiting, it's all right there at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans. And look, it's Thursday. That means tomorrow's Friday. And on Friday is the final day of our special kickoff sale that we're running. And so if you've been on the fence of like, I listen to this guy's podcast all the time. He always talks about how much coverage and Pitt content and community and conversation there is at Panther-Lair.com. Do I really want to dive into it? I don't know. Now's the time to find out, because we're going to give it to you for 60% off. You get a year of the best Pitt sports coverage for 60% off with the promo code KICKOFF2024. So you need to go and do that right now. Go to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Sign up for a new annual subscription. Use the promo code KICKOFF2024, and you'll get 60% off. That's a great deal. All right. It only runs till tomorrow, so you're only going to hear me talk about it for one more day. And then, of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so you never miss any of our Pitt video content. Had a lot of fun on the live show last night. I hope you were a part of it, because it was a good time with the over-unders. We had fun with that. And if you missed it, you're like, darn it, I always forget. Well, here's the way to make sure you don't forget. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on notifications, and you'll get an alert sent to your phone. So you'll know, oh, Panther-Lair's live. Nice. I'm going to check out that live stream. And once we start the season, when we have post-game shows, you're going to want to make sure you get those notifications so you know when we're starting. So youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and all of that. All right, 5 guys we're not talking about as much as we should be, or 5 guys we maybe haven't talked about enough, or 5 guys that maybe are just slightly under the radar. Even if we have talked about them, they're just slightly under the radar for what we think they're going to contribute this year. And the first guy is really the whole reason for this episode, because I wanted to talk about him. I asked Pat Narduzzi about him yesterday. We interviewed him yesterday. He's a guy that more and more I'm thinking is going to be a bigger part of this team and this defense than I thought, probably entering training camp. And it's PJ O'Brien. PJ O'Brien is an interesting cat, man. He's really his story is one of inconsistency, right? Like you look back over, I think where people first really became aware of him was in 2022, his sophomore year. Not necessarily because of the plays he made on defense. He played about 100 snaps on defense, but it was the plays that he made that were not exactly smart plays. It was on special teams when, according to Pro Football Focus, he took 4 penalties, including 2 in one game against Duke. And that stuck out to people. And people still bring it up now. People still bring up his penchant for penalties, for careless play, reckless play. Now, never mind that he had no penalties on defense that year. He had no penalties on defense he had 3 penalties on defense this past season, and kind of in back-to-back games. He had one against Cincinnati, one against North Carolina, and one against Louisville, which was actually, he didn't even play in the West Virginia game, so he didn't have one that game. But he had 3 that year. Let me just double-check the stats in 2021. 2021, he played a little bit. He had 2 penalties that year on defense. He played 97 snaps and had 2 penalties. Not great. So he does have a little bit of a penchant for that. And he also had 3 penalties on special teams that year. So you look at 21 and 22, he had 7 penalties on special teams. Add in a couple on defense that year, add on a couple on defense last year. And you end up with this reputation for being a reckless player, being a careless player, and being the kind of player who does things to hurt his team. That's the reputation that PJ O'Brien has, and that's the reputation he's had basically for the last 3 seasons heading into this year. However, he's also building and has built and continues to build another reputation, a reputation where he had 3 interceptions last year, second most on the team, a reputation where he's got, like, according to him, quote, 5 or 6 takeaways in training camp so far this summer. And we kind of monitor that. If you follow our coverage on Panther-Lair.com, we kind of keep an eye on this. The coaches give the defensive players a sticker that says takeaway every time they record, a takeaway in practice. And we sort of keep an eye on it because it's a very visceral, very tangible way of measuring who's making plays and who's making an impact. And Cruz Brookins has been one we've talked about. I think he probably between spring camp and training camp, he's had about 10 of those stickers. Allen Bryant, young freshman safety, wasn't here in the spring, has been making a lot of plays in training camp. Kyle Lewis has got a bunch of those stickers. Braylon Lovelace has a couple of those. Donovan McMillan's got one. And PJ O'Brien has, I think, the second most on the defense. He joked with us today or yesterday when we talked to him about he just can't catch up to Cruz. Every time he gets a turnover to try and get closer to Cruz Brookins' numbers, Brookins gets another takeaway, and so he just can't quite catch up. But that's not the point. We've talked a lot about Cruz Brookins. Cruz Brookins is not going to ever fall into the category of a guy we haven't talked about enough. We've talked about him plenty, but I don't think we've talked enough about PJ O'Brien and his role in this defense. I think he's going to play and play a lot. And I think what you could see this year is more of a rotation than we've seen with Pitt safeties in recent years. Like if you go back to 2019 with Paris Ford and Damar Hamlin, right? So if we go back to 2019, we look at the safety count or the snap count, according to Pro Football Focus, Damar Hamlin played the second most snaps on the team. On the defense, Paris Ford played the 4th most. Both of those guys logging more than 750 snaps. The next safety on this list, Jazzy Stocker, played 249 snaps on defense. But I think a lot of that might have been in that Delta defensive package as opposed to a full rotation. And even if he was quote unquote rotating, 249 snaps versus 779 for Hamlin, 758 for Ford, and those guys were only limited because they got kicked out of games. Like if they were limited in their snaps at all, or if they came off the field for Stocker, is because they got kicked out for illegal hits and targeting. That was not really a rotation. It was just those 2 guys playing all the time. 2021, We could go to that season with Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett. Those two guys were the top snap players on defense, top snap getters on defense that year. Eric Hallett, according to Pro Football Focus, 862 snaps. Brandon Hill, 796. The next most for a safety, Judson Tallender played about 200 snaps. You fast forward to 2022, and you're looking at a lot of the same. Hallett and Hill, top of the list. The next highest safety, Javon McIntyre, played less than 200 snaps. So you have Hallett and Hill taking more than 700. McIntyre, next most, less than 200. Now you go to last season, and I asked Pat Narduzzi about this yesterday. Well, you've pretty much always gone with just two safeties. Could this be a year where you rotate a lot more? And he's like, well, we had a 3-man rotation last year. Kind of. Javon McIntyre played 643 snaps. Donovan McMillan played 605. So both of those guys more than 600. PJ O'Brien, 14th on the defense in snaps, played 350 snaps. Now that's a lot closer to the top two guys than like Tallender was in 2022 or Stalker was in 2019 or one of those seasons. McIntyre in 2022, Tallender in 2021, Stalker in 2019. PJ O'Brien playing 350 snaps, it's a lot closer to what McIntyre and McMillan played. But it's still 250, almost 300 snaps less than those guys saw. So a bit of a rotation. He also started 4 games, including the first 2 before he moved out of the starting lineup and gave up that spot to Donovan McMillan. I wouldn't say he gave it up like intentionally or willingly or, that he wanted to, but nevertheless. So a rotation, closer to a rotation than what they had in 2022 or 21 or 2019, but still not what I would call even something close to an equal share of reps among 3 guys. Now, there's probably a conversation of like a true rotation. How close does it actually get to even reps and equal reps and a balanced reps? Maybe it looks like that. 650, 600, 350, and that's what the rotation looks like. I think this year it'll be even closer, and I think this year it might even stretch out to 4, including Cruz Brookins in that group. And it was funny, our good friend Jerry DePaula asked, Pat Narduzzi, after I asked him about PJ O'Brien yesterday, Narduzzi said, it might be a 3-man rotation, might be a 4-man rotation, with the implication, of obviously we understood McMillan, McIntyre, and O'Brien as being part of that. And Jerry DePaula asked, is Brookins the 4th guy in that rotation? And Narduzzi took it to mean, is Brookins number 4? And he sort of corrected him. He said he might be number 3 or number 2. I don't think that's what Jerry was asking, but it was a very telling response that maybe McMillan and McIntyre aren't locked into those starting jobs, that O'Brien and or Brookins could be pushing. Look, I don't think McMillan's coming off the field very often, but I think O'Brien will be in the mix. I think Brookins will be in the mix, and along with McIntyre. And I think, like I say, so we've talked a lot about Brookins. I think McIntyre is a guy that we should talk more about because of the plays that he's shown he can make. Pat Narduzzi said he's the best. He's got the best hands of anybody in the secondary. One of the best for getting to the ball and getting the ball. I think he'll play that field safety position where he's going to have the opportunity to make some interceptions. I think, we talked about the over-under on PJ O'Brien interceptions last night and set the number at 3.5. I think he's got a chance to go over that. I think he can be a ball hawk back there at field safety. And there might be a question of how disciplined he is on the field, but I think there's a lot to like about PJ O'Brien's professional profile, NFL profile, with his size, his speed, his ball hawk skills, his ability to get to the football and make plays that way. I think, if he can put it together this year as a senior and have a consistent year without some of the discipline issues and play a lot and make a lot of plays, I think he's going to have a chance to play in the NFL, which I don't know if I would have said that a month ago about PJ O'Brien. I don't know if I thought about him in that way, but I'm thinking about him that way now. Like I said, most of this, I really just wanted to do this topic to talk about PJ O'Brien, but here we are, we're really like almost 15, 16 minutes in, and I haven't gotten to some other guys. Let's talk about a couple other guys real quick. Shoot, I should have just made this whole episode about PJ O'Brien. Here's a few other guys to keep an eye on, though. Key Thompson. I think we've talked about Key Thompson, but I think he's going to be in a pretty heavy rotation with Brandon George at middle linebacker. I don't know if it's going to be, I don't think it'll be as imbalanced as it was like last year with Shane Simon and Brandon George, or the year before with Servassier Dennis and whoever was his backup. I think it's going to be a far more even and equal rotation with Brandon George and Key Thompson at middle linebacker. And I think Key Thompson will be pretty good. I think they really like what he's shown them, his ability to pick up the defense, his ability to work in the defense, his ability to excel in the defense. I think the coaches really like what they've seen out of Key Thompson. I think he's been pretty good for them. And I think he's going to be good for Pitt this year. I think Brandon George can have a good final season of eligibility at Pitt. I think Key Thompson can do well for himself also. Up front, I tell you, we really don't talk about Jimmy Scott. And Jimmy Scott, I think, will probably end up being a starting defensive end opposite Nate Matlack. I think we've probably mentioned Jimmy Scott just by way of talking about who will start at defensive end, and we think he's the likely starter along with Nate Matlack. But we haven't really talked about like what he might be able to do, and some of that is because I don't know. I feel far more confident that I have an idea of what PJ O'Brien's going to do, an idea of what Key Thompson's going to do. I don't know about Jimmy Scott, but I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities. I think he's going to play a lot, and I think he's going to, he's going to have a lot of chances to make plays. So I think this is a big year for Jimmy Scott as a redshirt sophomore, and I think he's a guy we probably should think about a little bit more. Number 44, so keep an eye out for that number. Another guy, we don't really talk about Ben Sauls. Yeah, it's part of it is just we don't talk about special teams, but we don't talk about Ben Sauls. I think part of it is like he finished 2022 so strong. What do you make? 15 out of his final 16 kicks that year, including 5 in the Sun Bowl, and the only kick that he missed was like a pretty long one at Virginia that had the leg. It just bounced off the upright. Last year he went 11 of 16. I think he missed 5 in 2022. He missed 5 last year. He might have only missed 4 in 2022. But 11 of 16, I mean, that's pretty rough. He made every extra point, but part of the problem is when you only attempt 16 field goals, your percentage is going to go down if you miss a couple. It's going to take some big hits because it's such a small sample that you're working with only 16 attempts. I think Ben Sauls bounces back in a big way. He's got to get more opportunities for sure, but I think he'll have a really good season, finish his career, looking like he looked to finish the season 2 years ago. But the reality is he hasn't really had a consistent start to finish season. And I think that's what you're looking for out of Ben Sauls this year. And then the last guy that we talk about all the time. We mention his name all the time, but I don't really think we talk about what he can do. And we probably should, is Konate Mumpfield. I feel like I have talked a lot more in terms of offensive skill guys about Poppy Williams, about Desmond Reed, about Rodney Hammond, about Sincere Lee. We've talked about Kenny Johnson and Dejon Reynolds. We talked about all these guys, but we just sort of take Konate Mumpfield for granted. I think we just, it's Konate. Well, what are they going to have? Well, they're going to have Konate out there, and then they'll also have this and this and this, and this guy might be able to do this and this. Konate Mumpfield, I think, is a really good player. And I think he's been in some difficult situations the last 2 years since he transferred to Pitt. And credit to him that he stuck it out. I'm sure he had opportunities to go elsewhere, but he didn't. He stayed at Pitt. He stayed working in that offense that you saw the last 2 seasons and was willing to stay and learn a new offense this year. Shout out to him. First of all, just for the loyalty and hanging around at Pitt. But I think he's a really good player. I think he, if he... What happened in the Florida State game? He got grabbed by the face mask, right? He was about to score an 80-yard touchdown. He had a 79-yard pass or something like that and didn't get a touchdown out of it. The guy got grabbed by the face mask and fumbled the ball out of bounds, out of the end zone. And so Florida State got possession. Who knows? That play could change the game. I remember going into the post-game press conference with Mike Norvell, the Florida State coach. And he was asked about the player who made that play, the defensive player. And he's like, it just shows his heart. He ran down that play. He never gave up on the play and all this stuff. It's like, well, what about the fact that he grabbed the face mask, But I digress. Konate Mumpfield is a good player. He's been in some really challenging situations the last 2 years, challenging positions. with, Keaton Slovis and the way he played 2 years ago, and then just the Phil Dracovic, Christian Veyer, Nate Yarnell experience last year, all under the guise of Frank Signetti. It's a pretty tough spot to be in. Really tough spot to be in. New offense this year. Maybe a quarterback who can get the ball to him a little bit better. I think he's going to have a chance to do really well. I think he's going to be this team's leading receiver. I think he'll be the leader in receptions, probably receiving yards, possibly receiving touchdowns. But I think he's going to be a mainstay of the offense. I think he's going to get the ball a lot, and I think he's going to make plays. I think he's a really good wide receiver for Pitt, who I think we just sort of it's just assumed. It's Kanate Monfield. Yeah. But we should probably put a little bit of shine on his name. You know what I mean? All right, that's a few guys. I really just wanted to talk about PJ O'Brien and the safety rotation. I probably should have just made the episode about that, but hey, people like lists and stuff, right? I think the algorithm likes it when you have lists. Who are 5 players we're not talking about enough? Yeah, 5 players we're not talking about enough on the Panther-Lair show. Anyway, all right, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. Don't forget we have the Morning Pitt mailbag coming tomorrow. So if you haven't got your questions in yet, you still have time. Put your question on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And remember, promo code KICKOFF2024 will get you 60% off a year of the best Pitt coverage at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe. We will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.